The scent of her fear hit him first, and for the first time in 4 centuries, something ancient stirred behind Vladeric's ribs. He had been sitting at the head of the obsidian table in the grand hall beneath Manhattan, listening to Lord Casimir drone on about territorial disputes in the Bronx when the shift occurred. The woman serving wine a human contractor hired for the evening's council meeting had been making her rounds with practiced efficiency. She'd poured for Duke Sorin, Lady Thessaly, and several minor nobles before reaching the seat beside Vladeric's own. That's when everything went wrong. Lord Casimir's nephew, a volatile young vampire named Draven, had caught her wrist as she poured. The crystal decanter tilted dangerously. Wine splashed across the white tablecloth like blood. "Clumsy little thing," Draven hissed, his grip tightening until the woman's face went pale. "Perhaps we should teach you proper respect." The words themselves weren't remarkable. Draven was known for his cruelty toward humans, a trait Vladeric found distasteful but not uncommon among younger vampires. What happened next, however, was unprecedented. The woman lifted her chin despite the obvious pain, her dark eyes flashing with defiance rather than submission. "Perhaps you should learn to keep your hands to yourself?" The entire hall went silent. Humans didn't speak that way to vampires. Not here, not ever. Draven's face contorted with rage. His fangs descended fully, gleaming white against his pale lips. "I'll drain you dry for that insolence." That's when it happened. Something deep within Vladeric, something he'd thought long dead and buried, roared to life. His vision tinged red at the edges. The civilized, controlled vampire king who'd ruled the Eastern Territories for 800 years felt his consciousness sliding backward, making room for something far more primal. His hands gripped the arms of his throne, hard enough that the ancient wood splintered beneath his fingers. "Release her." His voice didn't sound like his own. It came out guttural, layered with harmonics that made the chandeliers overhead tremble. Every vampire in the room turned to stare at him. They'd never heard their king sound like that. Vladeric was known for his composure, his calculated decisions, his ability to navigate vampire politics with cold precision. This voice belonged to something else entirely. Draven, foolish and young, didn't immediately obey. "My lord, she's just a—" Vladeric moved faster than thought. One moment he sat at the head of the table. The next, he had Draven pinned against the stone wall by his throat, lifted 3 feet off the ground. The king's usually silver-white hair seemed to move of its own accord, floating around his face like he was underwater. His eyes, typically the pale blue of Arctic ice, had gone completely black. "I said, release her." Draven's hand fell away from the woman's wrist. She stumbled back, cradling her arm against her chest, her eyes wide as she stared at Vladeric. Most humans would have run. She stood frozen, watching him with something that looked less like fear and more like fascination. The rational part of Vladeric's mind struggled to understand what was happening. His feral side, the ancient instinctive vampire nature that existed before civilization, before courts and councils, had been dormant since 1624. He had learned to control it after it nearly destroyed everything he'd built. 400 years of perfect control, and now it surged through him like wildfire, demanding blood and violence and protection. Protection. That was the strange part. The feral side didn't just want to punish Draven for his disrespect. It wanted to protect the girl. "Vladeric!" Lord Casimir's voice cut through the tension, carefully neutral. "Perhaps we should adjourn for the evening." The king forced himself to release Draven, who crumpled to the floor, gasping. Vladeric's hands were shaking, actually shaking, as he stepped back. Around the room, nobles were gathering their things with supernatural speed, clearly eager to escape before their king lost control completely. "Yes," Vladeric managed, his voice still rough but more recognizable. "We'll reconvene tomorrow night." The room emptied in less than a minute, all except for the woman, who still stood beside the table, the overturned wine decanter at her feet. She should have fled with the others. Instead, she met his gaze directly. "Thank you," she said quietly. Those 2 words sent another shock through his system. The feral side purred with satisfaction at her acknowledgement. Vladeric pressed his palms flat against the table, trying to ground himself. "What's your name?" The question came out before he could stop it. "Julia Sinclair." She hesitated, then added, "I'm with Moonlight Events. We provide staff for vampire functions." Julia. The name seemed to resonate in his chest. Vladeric studied her properly for the first time. She was perhaps mid-20s, with long dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes the color of warm honey. Not conventionally beautiful in the way of vampire kind, she had too much life in her, too much warmth and color. But something about her face, the set of her jaw, the way she held herself despite having just faced down an angry vampire, called to every protective instinct he possessed. "You should go," he said, though every part of him wanted her to stay. "It isn't safe here tonight." Julia glanced around the empty hall, then back at him. "Are you all right?" The question was so unexpected that Vladeric actually laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Am I all right?" "Your hands are shaking, and your eyes—" She trailed off, tilting her head. "They were black a minute ago. Now they're blue again." Perceptive. Dangerously so. "I'm perfectly fine, Miss Sinclair. Please leave before I'm less so." She bent to pick up the fallen decanter, moving with the calm efficiency of someone accustomed to cleaning up after supernatural beings. "I'm contracted until midnight. Still have the dessert course to serve." "There will be no dessert course. Everyone has left. Then I'll clean up." She started gathering wine-stained linens, seemingly unbothered by his presence. Vladeric watched her work, torn between sending her away and simply observing her. The feral side had quieted somewhat, satisfied that she was safe and near. But the king knew better. Whatever had awakened in him tonight wouldn't be easily controlled. Already he could feel it prowling beneath his skin, hyper-aware of Julia's every movement, her every breath. "Miss Sinclair, I must insist—" "Julia," she interrupted, glancing up at him, "if you just saved my life, you can call me Julia. I didn't save your life. Lord Draven wouldn't have killed you, injured you perhaps, but—" His fangs were out and he'd stopped thinking rationally. "I've worked enough of these events to know when someone's about to lose control." She paused in her cleaning. "Actually, I thought he had lost control until you intervened." She wasn't wrong. Vladeric had seen the bloodlust in Draven's eyes. The young fool would have bitten her, and once a vampire started feeding in anger, stopping was nearly impossible. "Why did you antagonize him?" Vladeric asked. "Surely your company trains you in proper protocol." Julia's expression hardened. "Protocol doesn't include letting someone break my wrist because I spilled wine, which I only did because he grabbed me in the first place." You could have apologized, submitted, any number of responses that wouldn't have provoked him further. "Submitted." She repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "Is that what you'd want? For humans to just submit whenever one of you decides to hurt us?" The question hit harder than it should have. Vladeric thought of the careful balance he'd maintained for centuries, vampire superiority tempered with just enough humanity to prevent all-out war. Most vampires viewed humans as cattle at worst, useful servants at best. He'd always told himself he was different, more enlightened. But would he have intervened if the feral side hadn't awakened? Or would he have simply let Draven teach her a lesson about respect? "No," he said finally, truthfully. "I wouldn't want that." Julia studied him for a long moment, then nodded, and returned to her cleaning. They worked in silence, her gathering linens, him restoring the broken pieces of furniture he'd damaged until the hall looked almost normal again. "I should ask you something," Vladeric said as she prepared to leave. "Did we meet before tonight? Have you served at one of my functions previously?" "No, this was my first assignment in the Eastern Territories. Usually I work the Midwest councils." "Then why—" He trailed off, unsure how to phrase the question without revealing too much. "Why what?" "Nothing. Forget I asked." He couldn't very well say, "Why did my feral side, dormant for 4 centuries, suddenly awaken with an overwhelming need to protect you?" That would terrify her. It terrified him. Julia pulled on her coat, a practical black thing that had seen better days. "For what it's worth, I've never seen a vampire king intervene for a human before. The others usually just let their people do whatever they want." "I'm not the others." "No," she agreed, a small smile playing at her lips. "You're definitely not." She left through the service entrance, and Vladeric stood alone in his council chamber, trying to understand what had just happened. His hands had finally stopped shaking, but he could still feel the feral side prowling beneath his skin, agitated by Julia's departure. This was a problem, a significant one. The feral side of vampire nature was what made them apex predators. It was pure instinct hunting, feeding, protecting territory and mate. Most young vampires struggled with it for decades before gaining control. Ancient vampires like Vladeric had long since buried those instincts beneath centuries of civilization. The fact that his had surfaced at all was concerning. The fact that it had surfaced in response to a human woman was unprecedented. He needed to speak with someone who might understand, someone old enough to remember what he'd been like before he'd learned control. Vladeric pulled out his phone, a modern convenience he'd resisted for decades, before finally conceding its usefulness, and dialed a number he rarely used. "To what do I owe the pleasure, old friend?" Alaric's voice came through warm with amusement. The ancient vampire had been a contemporary of Vladeric's since the Byzantine Empire. "I need your counsel." "That sounds serious. Shall I come to New York?" "No, I'll come to you." Vladeric couldn't risk another council meeting, not until he understood what was happening. "Tomorrow night. I'll prepare the good blood wine. This should be interesting." Vladeric ended the call and looked around his empty hall. Tomorrow night felt impossibly far away. He could still smell Julia's scent, something floral mixed with the sharp tang of fear she'd felt when Draven grabbed her. The feral side wanted to follow that scent, to make sure she got home safely, to eliminate any other potential threats to her safety. He forced himself to walk in the opposite direction, toward his private chambers. Control. He'd mastered it once, he could master it again. But as he passed a mirror in the corridor, he glimpsed his reflection and stopped. His eyes were black again, and he hadn't even noticed the change. This was worse than he thought. Morning came too slowly. Vladeric didn't sleep. Ancient vampires rarely needed to, so he spent the day reading old journals, accounts from his earlier years when the feral side had ruled him. The entries were disturbing. He'd been violent, possessive, driven entirely by instinct rather than reason. It had taken a near disaster with a human woman in Venice to finally force him to lock that part of himself away. The irony wasn't lost on him that another human woman had now brought it roaring back to life. He left for Boston just after sunset, traveling by his private car rather than the more efficient option of flight. The journey gave him time to think, to plan. By the time he arrived at Alaric's estate in the suburbs, he'd almost convinced himself he had the situation under control. Alaric met him at the door, his white hair pulled back in its customary braid, his pale features arranged in an expression of concern. "You look terrible. Thank you for that observation. When's the last time you fed properly?" Vladeric tried to remember. Days? A week? He'd been distracted lately, though he hadn't understood why until last night. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Come, sit. Tell me what's happened." They settled in Alaric's study, a room lined floor to ceiling with books that smelled of leather and age. Alaric poured them both glasses of blood wine, human blood mixed with rare vintage, a delicacy among their kind, and waited. Vladeric told him everything. The council meeting, Draven's aggression, Julia's defiance, and most importantly, the awakening of his feral side. When he finished, Alaric sat in silence for several minutes. 400 years, the old vampire finally said. "I never thought I'd see it surface again." "Neither did I, which is why I need your help understanding why it happened." Alaric swirled his wine, studying its dark color in the lamplight. "You remember what triggered your feral side in Venice, yes?" "A threat to someone I cared about. But that's different. I barely knew Katerina. This girl Julia, I'd never even seen her before last night. You'd known Katerina for approximately 3 minutes before your feral side decided she was yours to protect. Time isn't the factor here, Vladeric. Recognition is." The word settled heavily between them. Recognition, the vampire concept that had no real human equivalent. It was what happened when a vampire encountered someone whose soul resonated with their own. Not love at first sight, exactly, but something deeper and more primal. A match that existed at the level of fundamental existence. "That's impossible," Vladeric said flatly. "I'm 800 years old. If I were capable of recognition, it would have happened centuries ago. Or you've been so focused on control, on being the perfect king, that you've shut yourself off from the possibility." Alaric leaned forward. "Tell me honestly, when was the last time you felt anything at all? Real emotion, not the performance you put on for court." Vladeric opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. When had he last felt something genuine? Decades? Longer? He'd become so skilled at playing the role of king that he'd forgotten there was supposed to be a person underneath. The feral side isn't your enemy, Alaric continued. It's the part of you that still knows how to feel, how to want something beyond duty and politics. It recognized her because you did, even if your conscious mind hasn't accepted it yet. I can't. I'm the vampire king of the Eastern Territories. I have responsibilities, alliances, a careful balance to maintain. Getting involved with a human would make you vulnerable. Yes, I know. That's why you've been alone for centuries. Alaric's voice gentled. But Vladeric, what's the point of living forever if you're not actually alive? The question haunted him during the drive back to New York. What was the point? He had power, respect, everything a vampire could want. But Alaric was right, he couldn't remember the last time he'd truly felt anything. Until Julia. Until her fear and defiance had pierced through centuries of careful control and woken something he'd thought long dead. It was nearly dawn when he arrived back at his residence, a penthouse that occupied the top 3 floors of a building he owned in Midtown. He should rest, prepare for the evening's inevitable political fallout from last night's display. Instead, he found himself at his computer, looking up Moonlight Events. The company website was professional but sparse. Family-owned, specializing in supernatural clientele, discretion guaranteed. There was a contact form, but no staff directory, no way to find Julia specifically, which was probably for the best. Getting involved with her would be foolish, dangerous, potentially catastrophic for his carefully ordered existence. He closed the laptop and went to bed as the sun rose, telling himself he'd forget about her, that the feral side would quiet back down now that the immediate threat had passed, that everything would return to normal. He should have known better. The dreams started immediately. Not the usual vampire stillness of daytime rest, but vivid, intense dreams of Julia. Her voice, her scent, the way she'd looked at him without fear. In the dreams, he could touch her, taste her, protect her the way every instinct demanded. He woke at sunset, feeling more tired than when he'd gone to sleep, his body tight with frustrated need. A message waited on his phone from Lord Casimir. Council demands explanation for last night's behavior. Emergency session tonight. Of course they did. Vladeric had violated several unspoken rules, intervening in another lord's discipline of a human, displaying loss of control, canceling a session without proper cause. The other nobles would see weakness, opportunity. He needed to handle this carefully. He dressed in his formal court attire, black suit, silver cufflinks, the onyx ring that marked his position as king. The outfit was armor as much as clothing, a reminder to everyone who saw him that he was in control, even if it didn't feel true. The council chamber was packed when he arrived. Every noble in the Eastern Territories had shown up, drawn by gossip about their king's unprecedented behavior. Vladeric took his place at the head of the table and let his gaze sweep across the assembly. Most dropped their eyes respectfully. A few met his stare with calculation. Lord Casimir stood to speak first, as was his right as eldest lord. Your Majesty, we are concerned. Your display last night was unusual. Some might even say unstable. Some might say protective of our interests, Vladeric countered smoothly. Lord Draven was about to violate our treaty with the human contracting agencies. Killing a Moonlight Events employee would have created significant diplomatic complications. It was a good argument, logical and political. Several nobles nodded. But Casimir wasn't convinced. With respect, Your Majesty, your response seemed personal rather than political. Your eyes went full black. Your control slipped. He paused meaningfully. We need to know our king is stable. There it was, the challenge, carefully worded but unmistakable. If enough nobles thought Vladeric was losing control, they could call for a vote of no confidence. He'd be forced to fight challengers for his throne, a process that would be both bloody and destabilizing. My control is absolute, Vladeric said, putting centuries of cold authority into his voice, as Lord Draven learned last night, as any of you will learn if you mistake careful strategy for weakness. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. This was the Vladeric they knew, calculating, slightly threatening, utterly controlled. Several nobles shifted uncomfortably. However, he continued, Lord Casimir raises a valid concern. Therefore, I will personally oversee a review of our human contracting protocols to ensure no similar incidents occur. Lord Draven will issue a formal apology to Moonlight Events and submit to a probationary period, during which his behavior will be closely monitored. It was a compromise that gave everyone something. Casimir got acknowledgement of his concern. Draven got punished, but not severely. The council got reassurance that their king was still thinking politically. Only Vladeric knew how much the decision cost him. Every instinct screamed to banish Draven entirely, to make an example of anyone who might threaten Julia again. Julia. He couldn't stop thinking of her. Even now, surrounded by vampire nobility, part of his mind was tracking the hours until Moonlight Events' next scheduled function in his territory. 4 days. He had 4 days to get himself under control before he might see her again. The council session dragged on for hours, covering territorial disputes and blood bank allocations and a dozen other tedious matters of state. Vladeric participated, made decisions, played his role perfectly. But underneath, the feral side prowled restlessly, unsatisfied with politics, when what it wanted was her. When the session finally ended, he returned to his penthouse and did something he rarely allowed himself. He took out his frustration on the private gym he maintained. Vampires didn't need exercise, but the physical release of hitting something helped quiet his mind. He demolished 3 heavy bags before his hands finally stopped shaking. His phone rang. Alaric. "I heard about the council session," the old vampire said without preamble. "Clever political maneuvering." "Thank you. But you're suffering. I can hear it in your voice." Vladeric said nothing. What was there to say? That every moment away from Julia felt wrong. That his skin felt too tight, his control too fragile. That he'd started counting down the hours until he might see her again like some lovesick youngling. "You have 2 choices," Alaric continued. "Fight this recognition bond and make yourself miserable for however long you can maintain the denial. Or accept it and see where it leads. She's human. She'll age and die while I remain. That's assuming we could even make it work, which is unlikely given she has no reason to want a vampire in her life beyond that one encounter. Those are problems for later. Right now you need to decide if you're brave enough to feel something real again." Brave. The word stung. Vladeric had faced down rival vampire lords, survived centuries of political intrigue, negotiated peace between supernatural species. But the thought of approaching Julia, of opening himself up to the possibility of rejection or loss, terrified him more than any physical threat. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "Don't think too long. 400 years is already quite enough time spent hiding from yourself." The next 4 days were torture. Vladeric attended meetings, handled territorial business, maintained his facade of perfect control. But at night, alone in his penthouse, he dreamed of Julia. Her voice, her scent, the way she'd stood her ground despite her fear. The feral side grew increasingly agitated, demanding he find her, protect her, claim her. On the 4th night, he gave in. The Moonlight Events office was located in a nondescript building in Queens, far from the Manhattan vampire courts. Vladeric stood across the street for 10 minutes, arguing with himself. This was foolish, dangerous, completely inappropriate for a vampire king. He crossed the street anyway. The office was closed. It was nearly midnight, but he could hear a heartbeat inside. Julia's heartbeat. He'd memorized its rhythm without meaning to. Vladeric knocked on the door, then waited, hyper-aware of how strange this must look. A vampire king, making house calls. The door opened a crack. Julia's face appeared, her expression shifting from wariness to surprise. "Your Majesty?" "Vladeric," he corrected. "May I come in?" She hesitated, then opened the door wider. "I suppose you're not the type who needs an invitation, despite what the movies say." "The invitation myth is complicated. We don't need them to enter public spaces, but private homes are different. This office exists in a gray area." "That's not even close to why I asked." She closed the door behind him, then crossed her arms. "What are you doing here?" "Good question." Vladeric looked around the small office, buying time. It was cluttered but organized, with filing cabinets along one wall and a desk covered in schedules and contracts. Julia had been working late, apparently. She wore jeans and a sweater instead of her formal catering attire, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked tired but beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. "I wanted to check on you," he said finally, "to make sure Lord Draven's behavior hadn't frightened you away from working vampire events. That's why you came here at midnight? To check on employee retention?" Put that way, it sounded absurd. "Not entirely." "Then why?" "Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. Because my feral side has decided you're mine to protect. Because I've spent 4 days trying and failing to convince myself I don't need to see you again." "Because I wanted to see you," he admitted. The honesty felt dangerous. Julia studied him for a long moment. "Okay, that's either really sweet or really creepy, and I can't decide which." Despite everything, Vladeric smiled. "I imagine it's somewhat both." "Probably." She moved to her desk, gathering papers into neat stacks. "For what it's worth, I wasn't scared off. I've dealt with aggressive vampires before. Draven wasn't even the worst." The feral side bristled at that information. "Who was?" "Doesn't matter. I handled it." She glanced up at him. "You really don't have to worry about me. I know what I'm doing. That's what concerns me. You shouldn't have to handle vampires assaulting you. It shouldn't be part of the job description." "Maybe not, but it's the reality of working supernatural events." She sat on the edge of her desk. "Is this what you really came here to discuss? Working conditions?" "No," Vladeric admitted. He moved closer, drawn by instinct he couldn't entirely control. "I came because I needed to know you were safe, because I haven't stopped thinking about you since that night, because something happened when I saw you threatened, and I don't entirely understand it, but I can't ignore it anymore." The words hung in the air between them. Julia's heartbeat quickened. He could hear it, smell the slight spike of adrenaline in her blood. But she didn't look away. "Something happened to me too," she said quietly. "I've served at dozens of vampire functions, important ones, with powerful people. But I've never seen anyone look the way you looked when you defended me. Like you would have torn the whole world apart if it meant keeping me safe." "I would have." The admission came without thought. "I still would." "Why? You don't know me." How could he explain recognition to someone who'd never felt it? "I don't know. But from the moment I saw Draven threaten you, some part of me understood that you mattered, that keeping you safe mattered more than politics or peace or my own control." Julia was quiet for several heartbeats. "That sounds intense." "It is. And probably really complicated, given you're literally vampire royalty and I'm a human caterer." "Extremely complicated," Vladeric agreed. "So what happens now?" "Good question. What did happen now?" He could walk away, return to his carefully controlled existence, fight the recognition bond until it faded. Or he could take the risk Alaric had challenged him to take. "I'd like to see you again," he said, "outside of professional events, properly." "Like a date?" She sounded skeptical. "If you're amenable." "That's a very formal way of asking." A smile played at her lips. "Do vampire kings normally date human caterers?" "This vampire king doesn't normally date anyone. I haven't in several centuries." Her eyebrows rose. "Centuries? That's... wow. Okay, so this isn't something you do casually." "Nothing about this feels casual," Vladeric admitted, "which is precisely why I should probably leave and never bother you again. But I find I can't make myself do that." Julia hopped off the desk and moved closer to him. She was tall for a human woman, but still had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "What if I said yes? What would a date with a vampire king even look like?" Hope flickered in his chest. "Whatever you'd like it to be. Dinner, though I wouldn't be eating. A museum I have extensive knowledge of most historical periods, or something simpler. A walk, a conversation." "A conversation sounds good. Low pressure." She paused. "But not in vampire territory. Somewhere neutral." "Of course. You choose the location. I'll meet you there. Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock at the Brooklyn Botanical Garden, there's a late-night exhibition. I'll be there." They stood in silence for a moment, and Vladeric became acutely aware of how close she was. Close enough that he could hear her heartbeat, smell the floral scent of her shampoo, feel the warmth radiating from her human body. Every instinct urged him closer, but he forced himself to step back. "I should go, let you get back to your work." Julia nodded, though she looked almost disappointed. "Tomorrow night, then?" "Tomorrow night," he confirmed. Vladeric made it all the way to the door before stopping. "Julia?" "Yes?" "Thank you." for giving me a chance." Her smile was genuine and warm. "Thank you for asking." He left before he could do something foolish, like kiss her. That could wait, should wait. This was all moving incredibly fast already. But as he walked through the Queen streets back toward Manhattan, Vladeric felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries. Anticipation. Not the grim preparation for political maneuvering or the strategic planning of territorial defense. Simple, genuine excitement about seeing someone again. The feral side purred contentedly, satisfied that he'd taken a step toward claiming what it recognized as his. Vladeric didn't fight the feeling. For once, the feral side and his rational mind agreed completely. The next 24 hours passed with agonizing slowness. Vladeric handled his duties on autopilot, his mind constantly drifting to the coming evening. He changed his outfit 3 times ridiculous for a vampire his age, before settling on something less formal than his usual court attire. Dark jeans, a black shirt, a jacket that didn't scream royalty. He wanted Julia to see him as a person, not a title. He arrived at the Brooklyn Botanical Garden 15 minutes early, which gave him time to pace and question every decision that had led him here. What was he doing? He was 800 years old, ruler of the Eastern Territories, and he was nervous about a date. It was absurd. Then Julia appeared, walking down the path toward him, and every doubt evaporated. She wore a simple blue dress that brought out the honey color of her eyes, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders. When she smiled at him, Vladeric felt something in his chest that he'd thought long dead come fully to life. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he replied, and felt ridiculous for how much meaning that single syllable carried. They walked through the garden together, following the paths between exotic plants and flowers that bloomed even in the evening darkness. Julia asked questions about his past carefully, as though aware she was treading on sensitive ground. Vladeric found himself answering honestly, telling her things he rarely shared with anyone. "So you've ruled New York for how long?" she asked as they paused near a fountain. "I've had oversight of the Eastern Territories for 400 years, give or take. New York specifically for about 2 centuries. Before that, I was in Europe." "What made you come to America?" "Political complications. I needed a fresh start, somewhere I could build power without existing alliances and enemies complicating everything." He paused. "Also, I'd grown tired of the old world. Too many memories." "Bad memories?" "Some, mostly just long. When you live as long as I have, places accumulate history. Sometimes it's easier to start over." Julia was quiet for a moment, her fingers trailing through the fountain's water. "Is that how you think about people too? Do we all just accumulate and then get left behind?" The question cut deeper than she probably intended. "I used to think that way," Vladeric admitted. "It seemed safer. But recently I've been reminded that the alternative, never connecting at all, is far lonelier." She looked up at him. "By recently, you mean 4 days ago?" "I mean you, yes. I still don't understand that. Why me? What made you—" She gestured vaguely. "Whatever happened that night?" Vladeric considered how much to tell her. The truth felt too intense, too soon. But lying also felt wrong. "Vampires have a concept called recognition," he said carefully. "It's rare, especially among older vampires. It's when you encounter someone whose soul resonates with your own on a fundamental level. Time doesn't matter. Circumstances don't matter. You just know." Julia's eyes widened. "That's what happened?" "I think so. I can't be certain, I've never experienced it before. But the way my entire nature responded to seeing you threatened, the way I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. It fits what I know of recognition." "That sounds intense. You said that before. You're not wrong." "And you've lived 800 years without feeling this?" "I've lived 800 years very carefully avoiding anything that might make me feel this," Vladeric corrected. "Being a vampire king requires control, distance, strategy. Emotions are liabilities. Or so I told myself." Julia moved closer to him, studying his face in the moonlight. "And now?" "Now I'm standing in a garden with a human woman I barely know, telling her things I've never told anyone and feeling more alive than I have in centuries." He smiled slightly. "So either recognition is real, or I've completely lost my mind." "Possibly both," she laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "For what it's worth, I don't think you're crazy. Intense, yes, a little overwhelming, but not crazy. What about you? Vladeric asked. What do you feel? Julia considered the question seriously. Curious, intrigued, a little scared, honestly. This is so far outside anything I've experienced. But also, she paused, searching for words. Also, like I want to know more, like there's something here worth exploring, even if I don't fully understand it yet. It wasn't a declaration of recognition on her part, but Vladeric hadn't expected one. Humans didn't experience the soul-deep certainty that vampires did. But her honesty, her willingness to acknowledge the connection despite her uncertainty, meant more than easy answers would have. They walked for another hour, talking about everything and nothing. Julia told him about growing up in the human world that existed alongside, but separate from supernatural society. Her father had started Moonlight Events, recognizing a market niche serving vampire courts. She'd grown up understanding vampire politics better than most humans. So you always knew about us? Vladeric asked. Since I was 5 and watched a vampire noble arrive at my father's office in a coffin. That was memorable. She grinned at the memory. Dad explained that vampires were real, along with several other supernatural species, and that our family helped them navigate the human world. It seemed perfectly normal. That explains why you weren't terrified when Draven threatened you. Oh, I was terrified. I just didn't show it. She glanced at him. Fear and respect are different things. I respect vampire power, but I won't submit just because someone expects me to. That defiance, Vladeric realized, was part of what had triggered his recognition. Julia had a core of strength that refused to bend, even when faced with creatures who could kill her without effort. It was admirable and infuriating and absolutely compelling. I should take you home, he said reluctantly as the garden began to close. It's late. I can take myself home. I know you can, but I'd prefer to ensure you arrive safely. Julia rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. Protective vampire king thing. Something like that. She allowed him to walk her to her apartment in Brooklyn, a third-floor walk-up in a building that had seen better decades. Vladeric made careful note of the address, the security, or lack thereof, and approximately 6 different ways someone could break in. His mind was already planning upgrades, better locks, possibly a security detail. I can hear you thinking, Julia said as they stood outside her door. Stop planning whatever you're planning. I'm not planning anything. You're definitely planning something. Your face got all intense and broody. She poked his shoulder. I've lived here for 3 years. I'm fine. The fire escape is easily accessible from the alley. The front door lock is at least 30 years old. There's no security system that I can detect. You are objectively not fine. Julia laughed. Are you seriously critiquing my apartment security right now? Yes. That's ridiculous. And kind of sweet, but mostly ridiculous. She pulled out her keys. I'm a grown woman. I can take care of myself. I know you can. Rationally, I know that. Vladeric struggled to explain. But there's this part of me that won't rest until I know you're safe. It's not about thinking you're weak or incapable. It's about, I need to know. For my own peace of mind. Julia's expression softened. The feral side? Partially, though honestly, all of me feels this way. Feral and civilized agree completely where you're concerned. She was quiet for a moment, her hand on the doorknob. Okay, here's the compromise. I'll text you when I'm home safe each night. That way you'll know, but you won't be lurking outside my apartment like an overprotective stalker. I don't lurk. You absolutely lurk, but it's endearing, so I'll allow it. She smiled. Deal? Deal, Vladeric agreed, though the feral side protested. It wanted to stand guard personally, to eliminate any possible threat, but he forced it down. Julia needed space, autonomy. He wouldn't become the controlling monster that vampires had the potential to be. Thank you for tonight, Julia said. I had a really good time. As did I. Can I see you again? Definitely, though maybe somewhere that doesn't close. She paused. Do you ever go out during the day? Or is that not possible? Sunlight is problematic, not instantly fatal like legends suggest, but painful and weakening. I tend to avoid it. So our dates will always be at night. Unless you'd prefer not to date at all, yes. He waited, giving her space to reconsider. This was only their first real date. She could still walk away before things became more complicated. But Julia just nodded thoughtfully. I work mostly nights anyway with the catering business. That works fine. The relief Vladeric felt was disproportionate to the moment. Tomorrow then, if you're free. Eager, aren't you? I've waited 400 years. Now that I've found you, I'm disinclined to waste time. Something in Julia's expression shifted at those words, becoming softer and more open. Tomorrow works, but you're letting me pick the place this time too. Anywhere you want. She disappeared into her apartment, and Vladeric waited until he heard her lock the door and engage the chain before finally walking away. The walk back to Manhattan gave him time to process the evening. It had gone well better than well. Julia was intelligent, strong, willing to give this strange connection a chance despite how unusual it was, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, some threat or complication. The feral side remained on edge, prowling beneath his careful control. He was right to be worried. The attack came 2 days later, during their third date. Vladeric had taken Julia to a private art gallery in Soho that stayed open late for supernatural clientele. They'd been examining a painting from the Italian Renaissance when Vladeric remembered being commissioned when he felt the shift in the air. Vampires. Multiple, moving with predatory purpose. "Julia," he said quietly, his hand finding hers. "Stay close to me." She tensed but didn't question, which he appreciated. A moment later, 5 vampires entered the gallery. Vladeric recognized them immediately, Lord Casimir and 4 of his most powerful supporters. "Your Majesty," Casimir said, his voice dripping false courtesy. "What a surprise finding you here, with your human pet." The feral side surged forward at the insult. Vladeric forced it down through sheer will. "Lord Casimir, to what do I owe this intrusion?" "Intrusion? We merely came to view the art, though I admit, finding you here is fortuitous. We've been meaning to speak with you about your recent instability. I already addressed the council's concerns. Yes, you made pretty political speeches, but actions speak louder than words, don't they?" Casimir's gaze slid to Julia. "And your actions suggest an alarming weakness. The vampire king consorting with human cattle, risking everything for a woman who'll be dead in a handful of decades." Vladeric moved faster than human eyes could follow, putting himself between Casimir and Julia. "Choose your next words very carefully, Casimir. Or what? You'll lose control again? Prove to everyone that you're unfit to rule?" The old vampire smiled coldly. "That's what we're hoping for, actually. The council needs to see what you've become." This was a setup. They'd followed him, waited for the perfect moment when he was distracted and vulnerable. If Vladeric attacked, they could claim he'd gone feral. If he didn't, they could spin it as weakness. Either way, they'd manufacture grounds for a challenge to his rule. "This is pointless, Casimir. I'm not going to give you the excuse you're looking for." "No? Not even if we threaten her?" One of Casimir's supporters, a vampire named Marius, moved toward Julia with supernatural speed. Vladeric reacted on pure instinct, catching Marius by the throat and slamming him into the gallery wall hard enough to crack the plaster. His eyes went full black, fangs descending completely, every ounce of his feral nature rising to the surface. "Touch her and I'll tear you apart," he snarled in that layered, inhuman voice. "There it is," Casimir said triumphantly. "The instability, the loss of control. Witnesses will confirm the Vampire King has gone feral over a human woman." Vladeric realized his mistake too late. They'd baited him perfectly. Threatening Julia was the one thing guaranteed to break his control. And now he stood in a public gallery with his feral side on full display, having assaulted another vampire lord over a human. "Vladeric." Julia's voice cut through the red haze. She'd moved closer despite the danger, her hand tentatively touching his arm. "Let him go. This is what they want." She was right. Vladeric knew she was right, but the feral side didn't care about politics. It only cared about eliminating threats to its mate. Mate. The word resonated through him. That's what Julia had become in such a short time. Not just someone he wanted to protect, but someone he recognized on a fundamental level as his. The other half of his soul, regardless of species or circumstance. With enormous effort, he released Marius and stepped back. His eyes remained black, his fangs still extended, but he wasn't attacking. That had to count for something. "You've made your point, Casimir," he said, his voice still rough. "Now leave before this escalates further." "Oh, but it's already escalated. I have 4 witnesses who saw the Vampire King lose control. That's grounds for a formal challenge to your rule. Do you really want to go down that path?" Vladeric let some of his ancient power leak into the words. "A challenge means combat. Are you confident you can defeat me?" Casimir hesitated. For all his political maneuvering, he wasn't particularly strong in direct combat. "The challenge doesn't have to come from me personally. I merely need to call for it on behalf of the council." "Then call for it. Bring your champions. See how that works out." Vladeric's voice dropped to something dangerous. "But know this, anyone who threatens her, who uses her as a pawn in your political games, will discover exactly what it means when I lose control. And I promise you, Casimir, what you've seen so far is nothing." The threat hung in the air. Casimir's supporters shifted nervously. They'd come expecting to rattle an unstable king. Instead, they'd been reminded that Vladeric hadn't held his throne for 400 years by being weak. "This isn't over," Casimir finally said. "No," Vladeric agreed, "it's not, but the next move is yours. Choose wisely." The rival vampires left, melting into the night with supernatural speed. Vladeric stood in the ruined gallery, his body still thrumming with adrenaline and protective fury. Slowly, he felt his fangs retract, his eyes return to their normal blue. But the feral side remained close to the surface, unwilling to fully retreat while threats existed. "Are you okay?" Julia asked quietly. "I should be asking you that." "I'm fine. Scared. But fine." She looked up at him. "That was about your throne, wasn't it? They're trying to undermine you because of me." Vladeric couldn't lie to her. "Yes. My involvement with you gives them ammunition. A vampire king should be above such things, or so the traditionalists believe. Then maybe we should stop seeing each other." "No." The word came out sharper than he intended. "That's not an option. Vladeric, they're literally threatening your rule. I don't care." He pulled her closer, needing the physical contact to reassure the feral side she was safe. "Do you understand? I don't care about the throne, the politics, any of it, not compared to you." "You don't mean that. You've ruled for centuries, and I've been empty for centuries, going through motions, playing a role, existing but not living." He cupped her face gently. "Then I met you, and everything changed. 400 years of careful control destroyed in a moment because something in me recognized you as mine, as essential. I won't give that up. I can't give that up, not for any throne." Julia's eyes were wide. "That's insane. We barely know each other." "I know, but it doesn't change how I feel." She was quiet for a long moment, then leaned her forehead against his chest. "This is really complicated." "Yes? And probably dangerous. Definitely dangerous. But you're not going to walk away?" "Not unless you ask me to. Even then I'll struggle." He stroked her hair gently. "What do you want, Julia? Be honest." She pulled back to look at him. "Honestly? I'm terrified. This is all happening so fast and I don't fully understand it. But when I think about not seeing you again, something in me rebels against it, like it would be losing something important before I even fully found it." Then we're agreed. We keep going. Politics be damned. "What about your throne? If it comes to a challenge, I'll fight. I've defeated challengers before." He smiled slightly. "The difference is, now I have something worth fighting for beyond duty and pride." Julia managed a shaky laugh. "That's romantic in a violent, vampiric sort of way. I can be more conventionally romantic if you prefer." "No, this is fine. I'm dating a vampire king. I should probably get used to the territorial possessiveness and dramatic declarations." Dating. She'd called it dating, which implied continuation. Vladeric felt absurdly pleased by the casual label. "Come on," he said, taking her hand. "I'm taking you somewhere safe." "My apartment is not secure enough, not anymore. If Casimir is willing to move openly against me, he might try using you as leverage." "So where are we going?" "My residence. It has extensive security and protective wards. You'll be safe there." Julia hesitated. "That's moving pretty fast." I'm not suggesting anything improper. I have multiple guest rooms. You'll have complete privacy. But I need to know you're protected. She studied his face, then nodded. Okay, but I need to pick up some things from my apartment first. They made the trip to Brooklyn together, Vladeric hyper-alert for any threats. The entire time his mind was working through implications. Casimir's challenge meant political warfare. He'd need to shore up his alliances, prepare for potential combat, make sure Julia was protected at all times. It was exhausting just thinking about it. But when he looked at Julia, gathering clothes and toiletries in her small apartment, moving through space with efficient grace, he knew it was worth it. She was worth any amount of political complication. They returned to his penthouse as dawn approached. Vladeric showed Julia to the guest room, a spacious suite with its own bathroom, and a view of the city that would be spectacular once the sun rose. "Make yourself comfortable," he said. "There's food in the kitchen, though I apologize for the limited selection. I don't usually host humans." "This is fine. More than fine." Julia set down her bag. "What happens now?" "Now you sleep. When you wake, we'll talk strategy." "We?" "You're part of this now, whether we like it or not. I won't make decisions that affect you without your input." Julia moved closer, standing on her toes to kiss his cheek. "Thank you. For protecting me. For being honest. For all of it." The simple gesture sent warmth through Vladeric's entire body. "Sleep well, Julia. You too. I don't sleep much, but I'll rest." He hesitated at the door. "If you need anything at all, my room is down the hall. Don't hesitate." He left before he could do something foolish, like ask to stay with her. She needed space, time to process everything. He forced himself back to his own chambers and tried to rest as the sun rose. The dreams came immediately, but for once, they weren't just about Julia. They were about fighting, about threats closing in, about losing control completely. He woke at sunset, feeling restless and on edge. Julia was in the kitchen when he emerged, making coffee and looking surprisingly at ease given the circumstances. She'd changed into casual clothes and left her hair down. Vladeric's breath caught at how right she looked in his space. "Morning," she said, "or evening, whatever vampires say." "Good evening works." He moved to the coffee maker, breathing in the rich scent. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected, actually. Your guest room is really comfortable." They settled into an easy rhythm, Julia drinking coffee while Vladeric handled correspondence on his phone. It felt startlingly domestic, this quiet moment before the inevitable storm. "I need to tell you something," Julia said eventually. "About my father." Vladeric looked up. "The one who started Moonlight Events?" "He died 3 years ago. Vampire killed him." The words dropped between them like stones. Vladeric set down his phone carefully. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. Not many people do. It was ruled an accident. My father supposedly died in a car crash, but I know the truth. A vampire lord from the Midwest territories lost his temper during an event. Dad intervened to protect one of our staff. The vampire snapped his neck." "Julia, I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. You're not responsible for every vampire's actions." She met his eyes steadily. "But I need you to understand. I know what your kind are capable of. I know the danger I'm in just being near you, and I'm choosing this anyway." The confession hit him harder than he'd expected. She'd lost her father to vampire violence, and yet she was here, trusting him. It spoke to a courage and capacity for forgiveness that Vladeric wasn't sure he deserved. "Why?" he asked. "Why choose this, knowing what you know?" "Because you're not like him. The vampire who killed my dad was cruel and impulsive and didn't value human life at all. You're different." She paused. "When you defended me from Draven, when you went feral protecting me, it wasn't about power or control. It was about keeping someone safe. That matters." Vladeric moved to sit beside her. "I will never let anyone hurt you the way your father was hurt. I swear it." "I know. I believe you." She leaned against his shoulder. "So what do we do now? About Casimir and the political situation?" "Now I prepare for war, essentially. Political war, possibly physical combat if it comes to a challenge." He sighed. "I'll need to call in allies, make arrangements. It's going to be intense for a while." "What can I do to help?" "Stay safe. That's the most important thing. I'm not just going to hide while you fight for your throne." "Vladeric, I can help. I know vampire politics. I grew up in this world." He wanted to argue, to insist she stay out of it entirely. But the determination in her voice stopped him. Julia wasn't the type to sit passively while others fought her battles. That strength was part of what drew him to her. "All right," he said, "then you'll help, but safely, carefully, with full security." Deal. They spent the evening planning. Vladeric made calls to his most trusted allies, testing their loyalty in light of recent developments. Most reaffirmed their support. A few were non-committal, which told him plenty about where they'd stand if a challenge came. Julia, meanwhile, reached out to other human contractors who worked vampire events. She gathered intelligence on Casimir's recent activities, his known associates, any leverage they might use. Her network surprised Vladeric. Humans talked to each other in ways vampires rarely did, sharing information that crossed territorial lines. By midnight, they had a clearer picture of the opposition. Casimir had been building support for months, carefully positioning himself and his allies for a move against Vladeric's rule. The incident at the council meeting had been the excuse he needed, not the cause. "He's been planning this for a while," Julia said, reviewing notes on her laptop. "At least 6 months based on the timeline. Your defense of me just gave him the excuse to act. So it was never really about you specifically. You were simply convenient ammunition." "Pretty much, which is almost worse, actually, being used as a political prop." Vladeric reached over to close her laptop gently. "You're not a prop. To me, you're everything. Don't let Casimir's manipulations make you doubt that." She turned to face him, her expression vulnerable. "How do you do that? We've known each other less than 2 weeks, but when you say things like that, I believe you. It should be impossible, but I feel it too. This connection." "Recognition," Vladeric said simply. "It doesn't follow human timelines or logic. It just is." "Is it always this intense?" "I don't know. I've never experienced it before." He cupped her face gently. "But I suspect yes, when vampire instincts choose someone, they don't do it halfway." Julia leaned into his touch. "I'm scared. Of the politics of what might happen, but I'm not scared of you. I should be. You're literally an apex predator, but I feel safer with you than anywhere else." That trust meant everything. Vladeric leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he kissed her softly, carefully, hyper-aware of his strength in his fangs. Julia responded immediately, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck. The kiss deepened, and Vladeric felt the feral side purring contentedly. This was right. She was his, and he was hers, regardless of species or circumstance. The recognition bond hummed between them, growing stronger with each moment of connection. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Vladeric rested his forehead against hers. "I need to tell you something important." "That sounds serious." "For vampires, recognition is more than just attraction or compatibility. It's a mate bond, soul deep and permanent." He pulled back to meet her eyes. "I'm not asking for any commitments right now. We're still learning each other. But you should know what this means to me, to my kind." Julia absorbed this carefully. "So you're saying this isn't casual, can't be casual?" "Not for me, no. I understand if that's too much. It is too much. It's way too much." She smiled slightly. "But I don't want to walk away. Is that crazy?" "If it is, then we're both crazy." "That's comforting." She kissed him again, soft and quick. "Okay, we're doing this. Whatever this is." The next week passed in a blur of political maneuvering and growing intimacy. Vladeric attended council meetings where Casimir's faction grew bolder, openly questioning his decisions. He met with allies, secured promises of support, prepared for the inevitable challenge. Through it all, Julia remained a constant presence, sleeping in his guest room, helping with strategy, keeping him grounded when the feral side threatened to overwhelm his control. They fell into a routine that felt startlingly domestic. Julia worked on Moonlight Events business from his penthouse while he handled vampire politics. Evenings were spent together, sometimes planning, sometimes just talking, learning each other's histories and hopes. The physical attraction grew steadily, though Vladeric was careful not to push. Julia needed to set the pace. 8 days after the gallery incident, the formal challenge came. Vladeric was in a meeting with Duke Sorin when the messenger arrived, a young vampire carrying Casimir's official seal. The challenge was traditionally worded but clear. Lord Casimir, on behalf of concerned nobility, formally contested Vladeric's fitness to rule. Combat would determine the outcome, scheduled for the new moon 3 weeks hence. 3 weeks, Sorin said after the messenger left. That's generous. He could have demanded immediate combat. He wants time to prepare, to make sure he has overwhelming support. Vladeric set down the formal challenge. Or he's hoping I'll do something else unstable between now and then. Will you accept? Do I have a choice? You could abdicate, walk away from the throne voluntarily. Sorin held up a hand before Vladeric could respond. I'm not suggesting you should, but it is an option. Vladeric considered it for approximately 3 seconds. Walking away would mean leaving the Eastern Territories without established leadership. Chaos would follow, potentially endangering thousands of vampires and humans alike. And it would mean Casimir won without having to prove his strength. No, he said firmly. I'll fight. I'll win. Sorin smiled slightly. Good. Because I've already begun recruiting support for you. Most of the older nobility remember when Casimir tried this once before, about 2 centuries ago. He lost badly. They're betting he'll lose again. 2 centuries ago, I didn't have a human mate providing ammunition for his arguments. True. But 2 centuries ago, you also weren't willing to fight for anything beyond duty. Now, you have a reason to survive. Sorin stood. That makes you more dangerous, not less. After Sorin left, Vladeric sat alone in his office, processing. 3 weeks. That was how long he had to prepare, to make sure Julia was protected, to ensure his forces were positioned correctly. 3 weeks until he either maintained his throne or lost everything. He found Julia in the library, curled up on the couch, reading one of his first edition volumes. She looked up as he entered, immediately reading his expression. What happened? Formal challenge, 3 weeks from now. He moved to sit beside her. Until then, we prepare. What does the challenge involve? Is it like a duel? Similar. Combat between champions, fought to yield or death. I'll represent myself. Casimir will likely choose someone stronger to represent him. He's never been much for physical combat. Julia set down the book. So you could die. It's possible, though unlikely. I'm very old, very powerful, and I've survived similar challenges before. But never with something to lose. She touched his face gently. That makes you vulnerable. She wasn't wrong. Vladeric had always approached combat with the cold calculation of someone with little to lose. Now, the thought of dying and leaving Julia alone in a vampire world that had already taken her father made his blood run cold. Then I'll have to make sure I don't lose, he said simply. The next 3 weeks were brutal. Vladeric trained daily, pushing his body and power to their limits. He met with supporters, planned for various scenarios, made contingencies for Julia's safety should the worst occur. Through it all, she remained steady, helping where she could, giving him space when he needed it, providing an anchor of normalcy in increasingly chaotic circumstances. Their relationship deepened in ways Vladeric hadn't anticipated. The physical attraction was intense, but they'd moved beyond just that. Julia understood him in ways no one had in centuries. She saw past the king to the person underneath, the one who'd been hiding for so long he'd almost forgotten he existed. And Vladeric, in turn, learned her strength and humor and fierce independence. She was his match in every way that mattered. 2 nights before the challenge, Julia found him on the penthouse balcony, staring out at the city he'd ruled for 2 centuries. Can't sleep? She asked, moving to stand beside him. Don't need to. Advantages of being undead. That's not funny. It's a little funny. He pulled her close against his side. How are you handling all this? Terrified, honestly. I know you're strong and skilled and ancient, but I also know you could die in 2 days. Her voice wavered slightly. I just found you. The idea of losing you already is, you won't lose me. Vladeric turned her to face him. I swear to you, Julia, I will survive this. I will come back to you. You can't promise that. I can and I do, because failing isn't an option, not when it means leaving you alone. Julia kissed him fiercely, desperately, and Vladeric responded with equal intensity. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, he made a decision. Come with me. There's something I want to show you. He led her down to the lowest level of his building, through security doors and protective wards, into what was essentially his personal vault. The room was filled with centuries of accumulated wealth art, artifacts, treasure, but Vladeric moved past all of it to a small velvet box on a simple shelf. "This was my mother's," he said, opening the box to reveal a silver ring set with a deep blue stone. "One of the few possessions I kept from my human life before I was turned. I've carried it for 800 years. Julia's eyes widened. "Vladeric, if something happens to me, this is yours. Along with everything else I own. I've already made the arrangements legally." He took the ring out, holding it carefully. "But I'd rather give it to you now, as a promise. I will survive, I will return to you. And when this is over, if you'll have me, I want to build a life together, however long your human span allows." "That's," Julia's voice broke, "that's a lot. Too much?" "No, not too much." She held out her hand, and Vladeric slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the silver gleaming against her skin. "I want that too. A life together. Whatever that looks like." They spent that night together, finally crossing the physical barriers they'd maintained out of caution. Vladeric was careful, controlled, hyper-aware of his strength, but Julia met him with equal passion, no fear in her touch. The recognition bond sang between them, two souls finding completeness in each other despite every obstacle. Afterward, lying tangled together in his bed, Vladeric felt more at peace than he had in centuries. Whatever happened in the challenge, this was worth it. She was worth it. The night of the challenge arrived with fitting drama storm clouds gathering over Manhattan, thunder rumbling in the distance. The combat would take place in the ancient dueling grounds beneath City Hall, a space that had seen countless vampire challenges over the centuries. Vladeric dressed carefully in fighting leathers, traditional for vampire combat. Julia helped him with the buckles, her hands steady despite her obvious fear. "You'll be in the observation gallery," he told her. "With Duke Soren and my other supporters, you'll be safe there." "I don't care about safe. I care about you coming back." "I will." He kissed her forehead. "I promise." The dueling grounds were packed when they arrived. It seemed every vampire in the Eastern Territories had come to watch, drawn by the spectacle of their king fighting for his throne. Julia took her place in the gallery, and Vladeric forced himself not to watch her. He needed focus. Casimir stood on the opposite side of the arena, looking smug. Beside him was his champion, a massive vampire named Constantine, whom Vladeric recognized from the Russian territories. Powerful, ancient, and known for brutal efficiency in combat. This was going to be harder than he'd anticipated. The Arbiter, a neutral vampire from the Western Territories, stepped forward to recite the traditional challenge terms. Combat to yield or death, all witnesses to honor the outcome, the victor's word became law. Standard ritual that Vladeric had participated in dozens of times, but never with so much at stake. "Begin," the Arbiter declared, and everything else fell away. Constantine moved with the speed and power of his 5 centuries, striking fast and hard. Vladeric blocked, countered, fell into the familiar rhythm of combat. They exchanged blows that would have killed any human instantly, moving too fast for mortal eyes to follow. The arena echoed with the impact of supernatural strength meeting supernatural strength, but Vladeric was older, more experienced, and he had something Constantine didn't, a reason to survive beyond pride. He could feel Julia watching from the gallery, her heartbeat rapid with fear. The recognition bond thrummed between them, feeding him strength. The feral side rose to the surface, no longer something to control, but rather a tool to use. For 400 years he'd suppressed it. Now he let it fully merge with his conscious mind, becoming something more than either part alone. Constantine realized his mistake too late. This wasn't the controlled, political Vladeric he'd expected. This was something primal and furious, and absolutely determined to survive. The fight shifted. Vladeric stopped defending and went on full offense, driving Constantine back with a combination of skill and raw power. When the Russian vampire tried to use his superior size as an advantage, Vladeric was faster. When Constantine matched his speed, Vladeric was smarter. In the end, it wasn't even close. Vladeric had Constantine pinned within 20 minutes, Fangs at his throat, victory absolute and undeniable. The larger vampire yielded immediately, recognizing when he was outmatched. The arbiter declared Vladeric the victor. The arena erupted in applause and affirmation, his supporters celebrating, even his opponents acknowledging his strength. Casimir's face was ashen. He'd gambled and lost spectacularly. But Vladeric barely noticed any of it. His eyes found Julia in the gallery, saw her relief and joy, and nothing else mattered. He moved with supernatural speed to reach her, pulling her into his arms despite the assembled nobility watching. "I told you I'd come back," he said against her hair. "You did. You really did." She pulled back to look at him, touching his face like she needed to confirm he was real. That was terrifying. "It's over now. Casimir's challenge is defeated. My throne is secure. And we can just be together? Without political complications?" Vladeric glanced at the assembled vampires, many of whom were watching this display with varying degrees of shock and disapproval. A vampire king showing open affection for a human. It was unprecedented. "There will always be political complications," he admitted. "But yes, together, without anyone having grounds to challenge my fitness to rule, I've proven my strength. Now they'll have to accept my choices." Duke Sorin approached, a smile on his pale face. "Well fought, Your Majesty. Though I do believe you gave us all a demonstration of why it's dangerous to threaten what a vampire king has claimed as his." "Indeed." Vladeric kept his arm around Julia. "Let this be a lesson to anyone who thinks to use her against me. She is under my protection, now and always. Any threat to her is a threat to me personally." The message was clear and public. Julia was off limits, marked as the king's mate. It would cause talk, controversy, probably centuries of political debate. Vladeric didn't care even a little bit. They left the dueling grounds together, ignoring the whispers and stares. Back at the penthouse, alone finally, they collapsed together on the couch in relieved exhaustion. "So what happens now?" Julia asked. "We just go back to normal life?" "I don't think our life will ever be normal," Vladeric said. "But yes, essentially. I rule, you run your business, we figure out how to make this work long term." "Long term?" Julia twisted the ring on her finger, his mother's ring, now hers. "That's a strange concept when you're immortal and I'm not." It was the elephant they'd been avoiding. Vladeric was functionally immortal. Julia would age and eventually die, leaving him alone again. Unless, "There are options," he said carefully. "If you wanted them. Vampirism can be transmitted under the right circumstances. Not easily and not without risks, but possible." Julia was quiet for a long moment. "You're talking about turning me." "Only if you wanted it, many years from now, if at all. I'm not suggesting we rush into anything." He took her hand. "But I want you to know it's possible. If you decided you wanted forever." "Forever is a long time." "It is. Think about it. We have time." She leaned against him, and they sat in comfortable silence, processing everything that had happened. The challenge was over, Vladeric's throne secured, their relationship public and acknowledged. Against all odds, they'd survived. "I love you," Julia said suddenly. "I know it's fast and probably crazy, but I do. I love you." Warmth flooded through Vladeric's chest, the recognition bond singing with satisfaction. "I love you too. From the moment I saw you threatened, some part of me knew. You're mine, Julia Sinclair, for however long we have." "Forever sounds good, actually," she said softly, "if you're offering." "Are you saying, not now, like you said, we have time, but eventually, yes. If this is forever, I want to spend it with you. All of it." Vladeric pulled her close, overwhelmed with emotion he'd thought himself incapable of feeling. 400 years of emptiness, ended by one remarkable human woman who'd refused to submit to a vampire's temper, who'd stood her ground, captured his feral heart, and changed everything. "Then forever it is," he promised. "I'll give you the world, Julia. Everything I am and everything I have. I don't need the world, just you." They stayed like that as dawn approached, wrapped in each other, planning a future that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. There would be challenges ahead: political opposition, the complexities of a human-vampire relationship, the decision about when and whether Julia would be turned. But they'd face it together. The feral side that had been dormant for 4 centuries was fully awake now, and Vladeric no longer fought it. It was part of him, the part that knew how to love fiercely and protect absolutely and feel deeply. He'd spent so long trying to be the perfect controlled king that he'd forgotten how to be a person. Julia had reminded him. She'd broken through centuries of carefully constructed walls without even trying, simply by being herself. Strong, defiant, kind, brave. Everything he needed and hadn't known he was missing. As the sun rose over Manhattan, Vladeric carried Julia to his bed, not the guest room, and held her as she slept. He didn't sleep himself, but he rested, content in a way he'd never been. His king's ring sat on the nightstand beside his mother's ring that now graced Julia's finger. A perfect symbol of how his two worlds had merged, the vampire king and his human mate. It would be talked about for centuries, probably debated and dissected by vampire historians. Vladeric didn't care, let them talk. He'd found something infinitely more valuable than political perfection or centuries of control. He'd found love, real, soul-deep recognition-born love, and he would defend it with every ounce of his ancient power for however long forever turned out to be. In the weeks that followed, they settled into their new reality. Julia moved permanently into the penthouse, though she maintained the Brooklyn apartment for sentimental reasons. Moonlight events flourished under her leadership, now with the prestige of being run by the Vampire King's acknowledged mate. The vampire nobility adjusted to the unprecedented situation, some grudgingly, others with surprising acceptance. Duke Sorin became a regular visitor, fascinated by the recognition bond and what it meant for vampire politics. "You've changed the game entirely," he told Vladeric one evening. "Other vampires are starting to look at humans differently, not as cattle or servants, but as potential equals. It's revolutionary." "That wasn't my intention. The best revolutions never are." Sorin glanced to where Julia was working at the dining table, surrounded by papers and her laptop. "She's good for you. For all of us, really. The territories are more stable now than they've been in decades." It was true. Vladeric had found balance between his feral nature and his political responsibilities. He was more decisive, more confident, more genuinely engaged with ruling. The recognition bond had made him whole in ways he hadn't realized he'd been fractured. Months passed, then a year. Julia celebrated her 26th birthday with a gathering that mixed vampire nobility and human friends in an unprecedented display of species integration. It was awkward at times, but mostly successful, a sign of changing times. Late that night, alone again in their penthouse, Julia brought up the question they'd been dancing around. "I want to do it," she said. "The turning. Not right now, but soon. While I'm still young enough to adjust easily." Vladeric's heart clenched. "Are you sure? There's no going back once it's done." "I'm sure. I've thought about it constantly for months, the advantages, the drawbacks, all of it." She took his hand. "But mostly I just know I want forever with you. Real forever, not just my human lifetime. The process is painful, and there's a risk you might not survive." "I know, but I trust you to guide me through it." She smiled. "Besides, I'm pretty sure your feral side wouldn't let anything happen to me." She wasn't wrong. The thought of losing her to the turning process was agonizing, but the feral side was absolute in its certainty that it would protect her through the transformation, that she was strong enough to survive. "When?" he asked. 6 months. That gives us time to prepare, to make sure everything is arranged properly, and to say proper goodbyes to my human life." They spent those 6 months living fully. Julia traveled during the days while Vladeric couldn't accompany her, seeing sunshine one last time, visiting places she'd always wanted to see. Evenings and nights were theirs together, making memories and preparing for the transformation ahead. When the night finally came, they were as ready as they could be. The turning was done traditionally, Vladeric's blood mixed with Julia's, her human life draining away as vampire nature took hold. She was in agony for 3 days, her body warring between life and death and transformation. Vladeric never left her side, using every ounce of his power and will to guide her through. On the 4th night, she woke with silver-white hair and eyes the pale blue of Arctic ice, physical changes that marked her as his mate in vampire terms. She was weak, newborn, overwhelmed by enhanced senses, but alive. Vampire, forever. "How do you feel?" Vladeric asked, holding her carefully. "Everything is so loud and bright, and I'm starving." She looked at him with her new vampire eyes. "But I'm here. We did it. We did." He kissed her gently. "Welcome to forever, my love." Julia laughed, the sound more musical than it had been in human form. Forever sounds perfect. They spent months helping Julia adjust to vampire nature, learning to hunt, to control her enhanced strength, to navigate the social politics of their kind. She took to it naturally, her human understanding of both species giving her unique perspective. Within a year, she was more than just the Vampire King's mate. She was a power in her own right, respected and valued. Duke Soren dubbed her the Queen of the Eastern Territories during a formal council session. The title wasn't official. Vampire traditions didn't really include queens, but it stuck anyway. Julia wore it well, using her position to continue bridging the gap between humans and vampires. Decades passed, then centuries. The world changed around them, technology advanced, human society evolved, vampire culture adapted. Through it all, Vladeric and Julia remained constant. The recognition bond that had formed in a moment of crisis deepened into something profound and unshakable. They had eternity together, and they used it well, building alliances between species, creating systems that protected both vampires and humans, changing ancient traditions that no longer served their purpose. It wasn't always easy. There were still challenges, political complications, threats from those who resisted change. But they faced everything together, feral and civilized, vampire and former human, two souls that had recognized each other across species and circumstance. And if sometimes, during quiet moments, Vladeric thought back to that night in the council chamber when his feral side had surfaced after 400 years of dormancy, if he remembered the terror and recognition and overwhelming need to protect one defiant human woman, he smiled. Because that moment had changed everything. It had given him back the part of himself he'd been missing. It had given him Julia. It had given him forever. And forever, he'd discovered, was exactly as long as love needed to be.